This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good afternoon, Rabbi Glatstein. As we prepare for Tisha B'Av, Habalin L'Tayva, the Gemara says in Masechta Tainis and Daf Lamed, Taner Rabbanon, Kol mitzvos hanoyagos ba'avel noyagos b'Tisha B'Av. All the mitzvos that apply to an avel apply on Tisha B'Av. Aser ba'achila, uv'shtiya, uv'sicha, v'nilas hasandal, uv'tashma shamita. All the restrictions apply. All the 5 restrictions. Even though by the other Tanesim they don't apply, by Tisha B'Av they apply. All 5 of them. Because all of the restrictions do not apply to the other Tanesim. Why would they apply to Tisha B'Av? V'aser likrais b'Torah. You're not to learn Torah. You can't read the Torah. B'Neviim. Can't read the prophets. B'Ksuvim. The scriptures. V'lishnois b'Mishnah. You can't learn Mishnah. B'Talmud. B'Medrash. B'Halachos. Uv'Agados. But, says the Tanakama, Aval Kairuhu b'Makim Shena Raga Likros. You're allowed to read psukim that you never read before. Because whenever you read something for the first time, it's very hard to understand, and therefore it will be a difficult experience. V'Shayim b'Makim Shena Raga Lishnos. You can learn Mishnayos you never learned before. Because that you'll be breaking your teeth on, that will be a tsar. V'Kari b'Kinos. You're allowed to read Kinos. Kinos refers to Eicha. B'Iyov. Uvidvarim haram shabiyirmiyah. What about the kinderlach? Are you allowed to teach Torah to the kinderlach? Because a Rebbe that teaches Torah to the kinderlach, it's a very hard job for a Rebbe. He's in a lot of tsar trying to get those kids to listen. The tinoker shabes rabban betelin, they also can't learn. Mishum shenemar pikudei Hashem yisharim mesamchelei. The mitzvahs of Hashem are straight. They make the heart rejoice, and therefore you cannot learn Torah on Tisha B'Av. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Afeinu Kar b'Makom Shena Raga Likros, Beinu Shon b'Makom Shena Raga Lishnos. You can't even learn things for the first time, and Rabbi Yehuda argues on the Tanakam. What's the reason why you're not allowed to learn Torah on Tisha B'Av? Zakt Rashi, Va'aser Likros b'Torah, because it says about Torah, Mesamchei Lev, that Pikudei Hashem Yisharim, Mesamchei Lev, and you're not to be happy on Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is a day of Avelos. Learning Torah brings to Simcha. Comes the Marsha, and the Marsha points out that if we're up to him, he would argue on Rashi. Rashi says the reason you're not to learn on Tisha B'Av is because Torah makes you happy. Says the Marsha, look carefully at the Gemara. The Gemara only brings in the reason of Pekudei Hashem Yisharim for why kinderlach, why kids are not to learn. That means that means adults can't learn for a different reason. Aside from Pikudei Hashem Yisharim. And what reason is that? Says the Marsha. V'lulei Perushai. Had it not been for his comment, Nira delav mishum simcha nagba. It's not because of happiness. Delay maisi haikra demesamchei leiv ela b'seifa. We only bring this pasuk later. Gabi tinoika shabes rabban. Aval b'shar kol adam ika taima achrina. By everyone else, there's a different reason. Mishum shalai yishkach avelo shal yayin. You know how you're not to learn? Because it will distract your mind from
why you fast
from the Avelos. Right. You're not only, by the way, says the Marsha, not only can't you learn, you also can't work. You can't be involved in anything. It's a chiddush. Not only could you not go to work, you can't even learn.
By the way, where is it? An avel is not.
An avel is not to learn.
Eat.
What?
You said you have to do all of the things on Tisha B'Av as if you're an avel.
No, that's a say. It's kama. It's kama. In other words, anything, all the mitzvahs of an avel you can't do. Plus, aser b'achila v'shtiya. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the Marsha.
What category is the chitza under sicha? I mean, it doesn't mention here in the.
Okay, I hear. Okay, it's also aser. It's probably should be there. Okay. So Rabbi Glatstein, we're going to speak today about the Yisur of Talmud Torah on Tisha B'Av. And we're going to discuss a very interesting chakira, very interesting investigation. Because we know that even though you're not to learn on Tisha B'Av, you're allowed to learn certain things. For example, you're allowed to learn Eicha, you're allowed to learn Iyov, you're allowed to learn the bad things in Yirmiyah. So let's try to understand exactly. You can't learn other things, but Dvarim Haram you're allowed to learn. Fine. Now we know there's a mitzvah in the Torah of Higisa ba Yomam Balayla, that one is a person obligated to learn. How much are you obligated to learn a day? Let's say you learn 10 minutes a day. Is that enough? Let's say you learn 8 hours a day. Is that enough? Let's say you learn 23 hours a day. Is that enough? What's the Shiur Talmud Torah? You only have to learn when it's either day or night. If it's any other time, you don't have to learn. Now, day or night means you have to learn 24 hours a day. That's the mitzvah. That means the obligation rests on you all day long. The only thing is, you're exempt when you have other responsibilities. You have to sleep, you have to make a living, and so forth. But as long as you're not doing something that is required, right? The Chafetz Chaim says when a person speaks Lashon Hara, he's going to be held accountable for not learning. Because when you're eating, okay, I can't learn. When you're sleeping, I can't learn. But when you're speaking Lashon Hara, that's not an excuse for not learning. You're not going to tell your Rebutting. Rebutting says, why weren't you learning these during these 2 minutes? What are you going to tell him? Oh, because I was speaking Lashon Hara then? Right? So Chafetz Chaim writes that that's din v'cheshbon, that a person will be held accountable, men will be held accountable for whenever they could have learned. So now listen to the following question. On Tisha B'Av, you can't learn. You're allowed to learn certain Dvarim Ra'im. Are you obligated to learn those Dvarim Ra'im? Do we say, well, Tisha B'Av, you're not to learn. So I'll say the kinnis in the morning, and the rest of the day I'll sit there and twiddle my thumbs. You're going to tell me I should be learning? Not on Tisha B'Av. On Tisha B'Av, you're putter from learning. Yeah, I'm allowed to learn Eicha. I'm allowed to learn Yirmiyah. I'm allowed to learn, but I don't have to. Or do we say, once I'm allowed to, now I have to? In other words, this is a very important chakira. We have, the rest of the year, you have a mitzvah, v'yigisa b'yom v'layla, that you can't waste time. On Tisha B'Av, you're not allowed to learn. Now, there's certain things you're allowed to. Is it that you're allowed to learn those things, or do we take it a step further? That once you're allowed to, so now Tisha B'Av is like any day of the year. Now you, just like any other day of the year, you must learn in all of your free time. So to on Tisha B'Av, I can't learn Avodah Zarah, so learn Kamsa bar Kamsa. In other words, is Tisha B'Av categorically exempt from Talmud Torah? It just happens to be there's certain things that you're allowed to learn, or do we say no? Tisha B'Av, you're mechuyev to learn like any other day. It's just there are only certain things that I could fulfill. You hear the chakira?
You can find the answer from what the Dibri of the Gemara.
No, all the Gemara says.
The Koreh doesn't say.
Aval Koreh, you're allowed to. Does that mean you have to?
Put in the word allowed. Aval Koreh means.
Where do you put in the word have to?
Huh? It says Aval Koreh. That's Aval.
No, it says Asr Likrois B'Torah. So Aval Koreh means these things is not Asr. Does that mean you have to read them? Or can I just sleep the whole day?
Is it going to be totally on whether when you learn, if you're of the Madrega, or if you're learning about...
No, mitzvahs are not dependent on your Madrega.
No, because if you get simcha out of the learning, maybe you can't do it. But if you can learn, and
No.
further Madrega, that you're learning for the learning, but you're not being sameach, because you're getting the tsar or the yagmas nefesh internally, then you can learn.
No, the Gemara says there are certain things you're allowed to do. The question is, do you have to do them?
There's a response to him.
I-
The Golim who, by not learning, they are so bothered and they are miserable.
Oh.
They are not
Okay, it's the same idea.
Okay, so that's the question. Are you only allowed, is it that you're allowed to learn these things, or once you're allowed, you're mechuyev? So the first today we're going to be presenting many of the Sephardic, old Sephardic poskim that probably most people never heard of. They're the ones who get involved in the sugya. And we start with a posek called the Shevet Yehuda, also called the Mate Yehuda on Yeridea, Siman Shin Pei Gimel, which is Dinei Avelos. Says the Shevet Yehuda, Avel mutter likros be'iyov of a kinnis. And Avel is allowed to read Iyov and kinnis. Nire de mutter, when the halacha says it's mutter, ureshus ka'amar. And you're allowed to. But Shem Einoi Roitza Lomoy Klal. But if you don't want to learn when you're an Avel, let's say Nishan Kedach, someone's sitting Avelos, and there are no Avelim, are you allowed to stare into space, or are you required to learn? You're allowed to learn certain things. But, Im Einoi Roitza Lomoy Klal, Afilu B'dvar Harashus, Rashai. You don't have to learn. An Avel is categorically exempt from Talmud Torah. On Tisha B'Av, there's no mitzvah of learning. You want to learn? Okay, we'll give you a certain recipe what you're allowed to, but you don't have to. You could sit and stare into space. You're not mechuyev. On Tisha B'Av, there's no mitzvah of Yigisa B'Yom B'Layla. So he says, "De'ein loymar." Don't say.
Is that only on Avelim? Let's say
Avelim. No, not the whole year. Some people are makbid the whole year. They waste their time. No, we're only talking about Tisha B'Av and Avelos. Okay. So he's saying that you're allowed to learn Dvarim Hamutarim, but you're not required to. But don't say De'ein loymar Dekivan Dehu Mutter. Don't say, well, once you're allowed to Chazar Hadavar Lios Chayva, then it reverts back to being a Chayva. Ve'ena Rashoy Lios Yoshabatel. Don't say, well, now that there's certain things you're allowed to learn, so you can't just sit silent because it says V'gis Le'yam Alayla Delesa. Don't say that. Don't say that since there are things you're allowed to learn, so you're required. Why? Dekivan de Amroi, because since Chazal say to Pater Mitalmud Torah, if Chazal say you're Pater, Mashma de Pater Lagarmi, that means you're Pater, you don't have to learn, you could just sit. And if you'd be obligated to read Kamsa Bar Kamsa and Yirmiyav, and if you don't, it's not enough, then you're not Pater. If Chazal say you're Pater, that means you don't have to do it. If Chazal say Pater Mitalmud Torah, that means you don't have to learn on this day. So you have one day a year off according to the Shevet Yehuda. V'chein mashma, and the proof is, because what's the source that an Avel doesn't learn? Because Hashem told Yechezkel, Dom, be silent. Now, if Yechezkel has to learn Yirmiyah and Gittin, Kamsa Bar Kamsa, and Moed Katan, why should he be silent during Avelus? There's so much to learn. In other words, if you're mechuyev to learn Dvar Mutarim, then why would Hashem tell Yechezkel, be silent, keep quiet, there's so much to learn? He brings another proof. Go about 8 lines from the bottom on this right hand side. Rashi says in Moed Katan Daf Chaf Aleph, Rashi's bothered by a kasha. Rashi says, "V'hada amar avel chayev b'chol hamitzvos ha'amuros chutz min hatfilin." Rashi's bothered. Why do Chazal say, "An avel is chayev in all mitzvahs except for tefillin"? You should say further, "Chutz mi tefillin and Torah." Says Rashi, no, that's not what. Really, tefillin, they're pater from. Torah, they're only pater from because of simcha. So it's a different kind of p'tor. So says the Shevet Yehuda, why didn't Rashi just say simple? An Avel's not pater from Torah. They have to learn Dvarim HaMutarim. Right, Rashi had a kasha. Why didn't Chazal say they're pater from Tefillin and Torah? Why didn't Rashi say, they're not pater from Torah, they have to learn Gittin, they have to learn Moed Katan, they have to learn Yirmiyah. Must be, what? They don't have to. That they're categorically exempt from Talmud Torah. Brings the Shevet Yehuda another proof. There's a brisa that says, what if you're a Magid Shir and people need you? Otherwise, if you're not going to give Shir, people are not going to learn. Then the Gemara says, Einoi Nimna. Then you do not withhold yourself from giving Shir. You still give a Shir even during Avelos. So says the Gemara says, Einoi Nimna. What do we see from here? And in fact, the Gemara brings a Maisa that Rabbi Yosef Haglili was sitting Shiva, and he entered the Beis Medrash and he darshan the whole day. Says Hashem Yehuda, Alma, Einoi Nimna, you don't withhold yourself. Which means it's not usher to give shir, but you're not required to. Because if once you say you're allowed to, you're required to, why wouldn't it say Chayev Lidrosh? And also the fact that it says Rabbi Yosef Haglili gave shir, why didn't every other Chacham give shir if you're mechuyev to? It must be that just because you're allowed to do something doesn't mean you have to. And therefore he comes out that on Tisha B'Av you are categorically exempt from Talmud Torah. And you're not mechuyev to learn. It's the one day a year you don't have to learn Torah. Freedom, right? You don't have to, you can't eat, but he says at least freedom. Do we pass like the Shevet Yehuda? Well, if you look in the Erech HaShulchan is called Erech HaShulchan HaSfardi. The Sfardi Erech HaShulchan. By the way, the Shevet Yehuda is written by Mahari Iyash, and the Shevet Yehuda and the Erech HaShulchan was written by the Gri Taib. We'll see. He paskins, he writes, V'im einoi roitza lilmoid klal rashai. If you don't want to, you finish kinnis. You're not mechuyev to learn. You want to sit and stare into space? Sleep the whole day, you're allowed to. The rest of the year, you're not going to just go to sleep the whole day. If you don't need the sleep, you have to learn. If you don't need the rest, you can't just... No, on Tisha B'Av, there's no cheshbainos. Right? We don't say, well, once you're allowed to learn Dvarim HaMutarim, Ein Rasha Levav Divrei Torah. He paskins, he quotes the Mate Yehuda, he paskins like the Mate Yehuda. On Tisha B'Av, there's no Chiyuv Talmud Torah. The Kaf HaChaim. Yeah? No, not that Kaf HaChaim. Kaf HaChaim was Rabbi Yaakov Chaim Sofer. By the way, Rabbi Yaakov Chaim Sofer, when he passed away, he left off a small amount of the Kaf HaChaim that he didn't write. So the family of the Kaf HaChaim went to Chacham Ovadia Yosef. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef completed the Kaf HaChaim when he was a young man. Anyway, who does he paskin like? Like the Mate Yehuda, like the Erech HaShulchan, that if you don't want to learn on Tisha B'Av, you don't have to. However, it comes along the Stei Chemed, and the Stei Chemed asks, no. Comes along.
Himself agrees with him.
I'm not there yet. Says the Stei Chemed. Stei Chemed brings a very interesting question, and we know the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is what? D'oraisa. Tisha B'Av is Rabban. How could the Chachamim come along and say that even though the Torah says you have to learn, we rabbis say you don't have to learn? The Chachamim are being oiker davar min ha-Torah. How could the Chachamim? The Torah says v'higisa b'yom v'layla every day of the year, and the rabbis can come. We feel that today, that on Tisha B'Av, that we can't make people learn. We have to tell people not to learn. How could the Chachamim be oiker davar min ha-Torah?
Maybe that's what they added.
Says the Stei Chemed, what's the kasha? They're not being oiker davar min ha-Torah. There's still a mitzvah to learn on Tisha B'Av. You have to learn Dvarim HaMutarim. You have to learn Eicha. You have to learn Yirmiyah. You have to learn Kamsa Bar Kamsa.
So you have to.
So therefore, they're not being oiker the mitzvah d'oraisa. The mitzvah d'oraisa of Yigisu V'Yimalayla is in full force. All the Chachamim said is there's certain things you're not to partake of on Tisha B'Av. So you see from the Stei Chemed, what? Not like the Shevet Yehuda, and not like the Erech HaShulchan, and not like the Kaf HaChaim, that on Tisha B'Av, it's not the pshat that you're allowed to learn certain things, but you're not mechuyev to. No. You're mechuyev to spend every free moment learning on Tisha B'Av, just like any other day of the year. This is what the Stei Chemed writes in Klalim. In his Klalim.
I mean, you're going to learn in your Sameach.
No, but you're learning about Jews being murdered. So we're not talking about sadistic people. We're talking about when certain things that you learn about. That's why you're allowed to learn about Dvarim Ra'im. You're allowed to learn about tragic things. Right. No, normally.
That doesn't apply to all of Torah. I mean, just the fact that you're learning.
No, in general, learning is Mesamech Leiv. But there are certain things in Torah that because the topic is so depressing, that will sort of negate the regular Simchas Halev that you have. When you take a look at number 8. For Yisrael Rab Maharitz b'Seif HaSefer b'Chidushav lePark Eza Neshach Shehikshav Mai Dekaim Lan de Aval Asab Devei Torah. This that we hold in Aval is now to learn. Eich Yavay Avelis D'Rabbanon v'Yidcha Asay Delima Torah D'Oraisa. How could Avelis D'Rabbanon be oiker the mitzvah of learning D'Oraisa? Says the Maharitz v'Yeshataris B'Dochik. Kivan Shekari Kriya Shema Umispalal Ushar Psuke de Zimra. That's your learning. However, says the Stei Chemed, I don't understand the question to begin with. Because since Chazal say that you're allowed to learn Dvarim HaRoim, so that becomes something that you're mechuyev to learn, and therefore the Chachamim are not being oiker Davar min ha-Torah. Okay, so we have this machlokes achronim. Whether on Tisha B'Av you're categorically exempt from Talmud Torah, and it's just you have license to learn Dvarim HaRoim, or do we say no? Once you're allowed to learn Dvarim HaRoim, memela that becomes a chiyuv. Comes the moyed l'chol chai. Who's the moyed l'chol chai? of Chaim Falaji, one of the great Sephardic poskim. He says, "V'ho'ikerhu shelo yehei batel midivrei Torah." The main thing is, you can't waste your time on Tisha B'Av like any other day. You could learn Eicha, Eiv, Yirmiyah, Midrashim, Ma'id Katan, Halachos. He says, 4 lines from the end. It's brought down in the Psalm we saw that the Avel and on Tisha B'Av, you're only allowed to learn, but you're not mechuyev. They allowed to just do nothing. Says Reb Chaim Falaji, Li ha'pa'oit. Me, the small one, Sricha Rabbah. This doesn't make sense to me. It's bad enough that women have free time on their hands on Tisha B'Av because it can't work. Now you want to give the men idle time? No. You can't sit idle. You can't sit idle on Tisha B'Av. You're mechuyev to learn. So now, right, the nafkamina would be watching these productions on Tisha B'Av. If you have a chiyuv of Talmud Torah, so look, if you're too tired to learn, then you're too tired to learn like any other day. But if a person really could learn, he says, well, I really want to see this video. Now the video usually is not learning, it's not Talmud Torah. So it depends. Are you allowed to go watch it? So according to the first poskim, there's no mitzvah of Talmud Torah. So then it's the one day a year you could idle away, you could do whatever you want. But if you have a mitzvah of Talmud Torah and you're capable, so then that would have first priority. Maybe we should produce movies of learning on Tisha B'Av. Maybe this way that's why there's TorahAnytime.com. Okay. But in any event, now, so how are we machriya this machlokes? On the one hand, we have the Mata Yehuda, Shevet Yehuda, Erech HaShulchan, Kaf HaChaim. They say you want to sit idle, gezun tehet. On the other hand, you have the Stei Chemed, you have the Moy L'Chol Chai. They say no, you can't sit idle on Tisha B'Av. There are things you're allowed to learn, then it becomes a chiyuv. Comes Rabbi Ovadia Yosef in the Abiyah Omer, Chelek Ches, Yoredei Siman Lamed Hey, and he brings the psak of the Mata Yehuda, the Shevet Yehuda, who says that if you want to sit idle, you're allowed to. And Rabbi Ovadia quotes his proofs. Number 1, Hashem tells Yecheskel, be quiet, be silent. If you're obligated to learn Dvarim HaMutarim, then why would Hashem tell Yecheskel be silent? Rabbi Ovadia quotes his proof from Rashi. Rashi says that why does it say in Avel is only chayiv in Tefillin? It should say it's also chayiv in Talmud Torah. To which Rashi answers, well, really, an Avel is exempt, but he's exempt for a different reason. Now, if an Avel is mechuyev to learn Dvarim HaMutarim, then Rashi should have just said that. And Rabbi Ovadia brings all the proofs of the Mata Yehuda, to which Rabbi Ovadia says, none of his proofs have any meaning whatsoever. And his psak is wrong. V'chol elu einon rayos. Number 1, the Mata Yehuda says that Chazal say you're pater from Talmud Torah. Now, if you're mechuyev to learn Dvarim HaMutarim, why would they say you're pater? Says Rabbi Ovadia, what shas do you have? In my shas, it doesn't say anywhere that an Avel is pater from Talmud Torah. You made up a halacha. It doesn't say anywhere pater. All it says is, an Avel is not allowed to learn certain things. But it doesn't say he's categorically pater. This expression on which the Mata Yehuda is basing himself, well, it says an Avel is pater, don't say that anywhere. Don't say anywhere an Avel is pater. Da'anan lechazinan kahaylishna de pater. It says asur b'divrei Torah. The question, the proof was, but Hashem told Yecheskel, don't, be quiet. Says Rabbi Ovadia, but I have a question for you. Yecheskel is certainly allowed to learn Dvarim HaMutarim. So why would Hashem say, don't, be quiet? He's allowed to. The answer is be quiet from the things that you're not allowed to do. But the things you're allowed to do, of course you have to do. Rashi said, an Avel is chayiv in all mitzvahs except for Tefillin. And Rashi wants to know, what about Talmud Torah? Well, Rashi says Talmud Torah you're pater for a different reason. Why didn't Rashi say, because you're chayiv in Dvarim Haraim? You know why? Because Rashi's talking about an Avel. There's a machlokes, Tanoim, whether an Avel is allowed to learn Dvarim Haraim. By Tisha B'Av, everybody agrees you're allowed to learn Dvarim Haraim. By an Avel, it's machlokes. Rashi doesn't want to get involved in that machlokes. He wants to give an answer that works out for all opinions, and that is, we don't mention Talmud Torah because you're pater for a different reason.
Why should they be different if it's an Avel on...
Because Avel is more chamor. A regular Avel is more chamor than because it's a newer Avelos. The Avelos for Tisha B'Av is Avelos Yeshana. And says Ovadia, I searched and I found in Mahari Najar, in the Sefer Simchas Yehuda, he also pushes off all the rayas of the Shevet Yehuda, that like the following, that when the Gemara says that if the Rabbim needs you, Eino Nimna, which means don't withhold yourself, he says, and since you're allowed to, you are Mechuyev. And says Rabbi Ovadia, the Chacham Tzvi argues, and then says Rabbi Ovadia, I'll bring you a proof that even on Tisha B'Av, you're Mechuyev in Talmud Torah. You know what the proof is?
Any part? Any?
The proof is, when you wake up in the morning, you say Birchas HaTorah, no? Yep. Do you make a bracha on your lulav on Tisha B'Av? No, because there's no mitzvah of lulav on Tisha B'Av. Do you make a bracha on a sukkah on Tisha B'Av? Do you make a bracha on Mikra Megillah on Tisha B'Av? Do you make a bracha? No, you don't do those things. Do you make a shachianu for a pomegranate on Tisha? No. You don't make brachas on things. Why are you making brachas HaTorah on Tisha B'Av? How could you say b'tzivanu, but you're pater? So you say, what kind of kasha is that? But everybody agrees that even when you're pater from a mitzvah, you're still allowed to make a bracha. For example, women make a bracha on sukkah, they're not mechuyev in sukkah. Women make a bracha on shofar, they're not mechuyev in shofar. Women make a bracha on dal minim, they're not mechuyev. Says Rabbi Ovadia, wait a second. No, they don't. I paskin, says Rabbi Ovadia, women do not make a bracha on sukkah, right? We know Sfardim don't paskin like Rabbeinu Tam. That's the shita Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam holds women can make a bracha even on Zman Grama. The Rambam disagrees. Rabbi Ovadia vehemently holds that if you're of Sephardic descent, you better tell your daughters that when they go to these Ashkenazic schools and they try to impose on them minhag Ashkenaz, tell them they can't make these brachas. But even Ashkenazim who follow Rabbeinu Tam and they say you could make the bracha, you know why women can make the bracha? Because since men are making the bracha, so it's considered like a lot of mankind is mechuyev, so even women can. But if on Tisha B'Av human beings are categorically exempt from Talmud Torah, then how can anyone make brachas HaTorah? I understand how a woman can make a bracha on a sukkah, because since men are mechuyev, they're sort of tafel, and they could also make a bracha. But if like the Shevet Yehuda is saying, man is categorically exempt from Talmud Torah and Tisha B'Av, then what are you making brachas HaTorah for? So you could say, well, everybody agrees you say Shema on Tisha B'Av, and everybody agrees you read Parshas Karbanos, and certainly that part you do, but still, Rabbi Ovadia says his conclusion is Soif Davar Hakol Nishma. Avel Chayiv Lilmoid B'Dvarim Haraim. In Avel is mechuyev to learn on Tisha B'Av the bad things Kishe'ein HaMenachamim Etzlai, when he's not being consoled. V'lo yiyeh bato midivrei Torah, and he should not be bato from Torah. Says Rabbi Ovadia, he strongly, vehemently disagrees on Tisha B'Av. There's a Chiyuv Talmud Torah like any day of the year. Comes Rav Ben Tzion Abba Shaul.
Would the Rav Ovadia say that you're not allowed to learn sugyas that would give you symptoms?
Of course, right. That's, absolutely.
So you're chayav to learn those things that you're allowed to learn.
Correct, right. That's the whole, right. Now, Rav Ovadia Yosef had a long time chavrusa, Rav Ben Tzion Abba Shaul. Rav Ben Tzion Shaul was the Rosh Yeshiva of Parat Yosef, and they were long time chavrusas. They had a seder every Thursday night. They started in the night and they finished Friday morning. They learned all night, every Thursday night. Rav Ovadia and Rav Ben Tzion Abba Shaul. They used to walk together. They would chazer something like 40 blad on their walks.
That's what we call mishmar.
Yeah? Says Rav Ben Tzion Abba Shaul. You want to know about learning on Tisha B'Av? Look in the Shevet Yehuda. There's no chiyuv. It says mutter b'dvarim haraim. It's mutter, you're allowed to. And the Erech HaShulchan paskins like that. And it's mashma that the Shulchan Aruch paskins like that. Because it says you're not allowed to read Tar Nevi'im Ksuvim. And in Sif Beis he says mutter lumoid midrash echa. It's mashma, it's mutter, but you're not mechuyev. Rav Ben Tzion Abba Shaul, Rav Ovadia's chavrusa. By the way, in tribute to Rav Ben Tzion Abba Shaul, when Rav Ben Tzion Abba Shaul was nifter, of course Rav Ovadia was maspid him, and as a tribute to him, he wrote a special tshuva of all the dozens and dozens and dozens of times where he didn't agree with him. That was his tribute to him. Rav Ovadia and Rav Ben Tzion Abba Shaul had
Friendly disagreement.
Yeah, but they were mechabed themselves when Ovadia came to the yeshiva. Rabbi Shaul got out of his seat. He gave Rabbi Ovadia a seat at the head of the yeshiva. Rabbi Ovadia wouldn't sit there until they both came together to sit there. They had a tremendous Abba. But Rabbi Shaul sides with the Shevet Yehuda and the Mata Yehuda, the Erech HaShulchan, the Kaf HaChaim, and he says like this: Al Kenira, that if it's hard for a person to learn on a tainus, then say kinus until chatzos, and then after that you're allowed to rest. However, so Rabbi Tzion Abba Shaul is inclined to say that in fact you're exempt from Talmud Torah on Tisha B'Av. I need 2 batteries. You're exempt from them. However, he says, just because you're exempt from Talmud Torah, you should not waste your time, and you should still learn. Whether you're obligated or not to learn has really very little to do with whether you should learn or not. Of course you can't waste your time. Doesn't the Rambam say, thank you, do this quickly. Doesn't the Rambam say, in Hilchos Talmud Torah, Perek Gimel, Halacha Yud Gimel, even though there's a mitzvah to learn day and night, Ein Adam Loimed Roiv Chachmasai Ela B'Layla, a person gains most of his wisdom at night. Lefikach Misha Roitze Lezakos B'Keser HaTorah. If you want to merit the crown of Torah, Yizayer B'Chol Leiloisav. You should be careful in all your nights. Don't waste one of them. Don't say, well, there's this dinner, I don't really have to go, but maybe it would be nice. If you don't have to go, don't go. Learn. Don't waste any of them by eating and drinking and sleeping. Says Rabbi Abba Shaul. The Rambam doesn't say, well, one night a year you could waste. You could waste Tisha B'Av night. No. The Rambam says, don't even waste one of them. That's mashma. Even Leil Tisha B'Av. Okay, so Alach L'Maisa, Rabbi Ovadia and the Steichemed and others are very strong that if you're allowed to learn certain things, you're mechoyev to. And then we have this ancient source of the Mata Yehuda who says it's only a heter to learn, but you're not mechoyev to learn. And Rabbi Tzion Abba Shaul sides with that mahalach. Comes Rav Asher Weiss. Rav Asher Weiss is a leading place in Eretz Yisrael today. By the way, he just came out with a new set of Shaus Tshuvas with 4 new tshuvas about Tcheles, and he is vehemently opposed to it. Okay, but that's just a side point. Maybe when we revisit it next year, we'll... Okay, but he brings down, first of all, the Kliyakar in Parshas Toldos. He says, Esav says, Yikruvu Yemei Evel Avi, thank you. Let my father's mourning approach, and then I'll go kill Yaakov. What's this lashon of? He should just say, when my father dies, I'll kill Yaakov. Why let the Avelos come? Because Esav was a smart guy. He knew Yaakov was protected by Talmud Torah. So let the Avelos of my father come when Yaakov can't learn, and then I'll get him. Ask Rav Asher Weiss, what do you mean? Yes, an Avel can't learn other things, but Yaakov Avinu will still learn Dvarim HaMutarim. Is a raya to the Shevet Yehuda that when an Avel he's not allowed to learn, he's allowed to learn Dvarim HaMutarim, but he's not mechuyev to learn Dvarim HaMutarim. Okay, so now, question is, what's the logic? What's the logic of, why wouldn't we say that once you're allowed to learn Dvarim HaMutarim, you're mechuyev to learn it? Why would it be discretionary? I mean, if there's things you're allowed to learn, then you should have to learn them. I mean, just like the rest of the year. There's a chiyuv to learn when a person's able to. So why, when we say on Tisha B'Av, when you're able to learn Dvarim, you should be mechayiv. So he offers various svaros. One of them is, that I particularly like, is the third one. And he says, the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is to learn, the Gemara says, Ein Adam Loimed, Elama, Shalibay Chafetz. A person only learns well if they're able to learn what they want to learn. You can't legislate to someone, learn this now. I never like that. I always like to be able to choose. I feel I'm able to delve more into something that if I selected it. Right? That's human dynamics. People like to learn what they want to learn. So therefore, You know why you're not mechuyev, perhaps? You know what the position of, I'm not saying, Rabbi Ovadia says you are mechuyev, but what's the position of those who say that there is no chiyuv Talmud Torah on Tisha B'Av? Because what are we going to tell you? Yeah, you're mechuyev to learn this.
You don't have the freedom to choose.
Once we're legislating to you what you have to learn, that is fundamentally different than the normal mitzvah of Talmud Torah. You know when you're mechuyev to learn? You're mechuyev to learn when you could select what you want to learn. But once we're beginning to legislate to you what you have to learn, so then we can no longer obligate it to you. Then it's discretionary. He says, other svaras, he says, the mitzvah, let's say a person has to sleep. You have to sleep at night. Right? So is it bittul Torah to go to sleep? Oh, chas v'shalom. Is it bittul Torah to eat? Chas v'shalom. Is it bittul Torah to work? No, these are things that a human being has to do. Why? So we see from there that the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, the parameters of it is that you're mechuyev to learn when you're not occupied with an important thing. It's not that working is more important than Torah. It's not that eating is more important than Torah. It's just that we're human beings. God never obligated us to learn when we're doing important things. So on Tisha B'Av, there's a very important thing that we need to do. And that is, we have to be ba'avelos. We have to mourn the Churban. So mourning the Churban is no worse than eating or working. And therefore, since there's an obligation to mourn on Tisha B'Av, therefore, we're not mechuyev to learn. If you want to learn, you could. But that's that position. But Rabbi Usher Weiss points out something very important. That even the opinion that you're not mechuyev to learn, do you get a mitzvah if you learn?
Of course, why not?
Of course you get a mitzvah. It's not that, you're allowed to, it's a good thing, it's a mitzvah. It's of course, and you get schar for it. And he says, Rabbi Usher Weiss says, my brother, Hagoin Reb Chaim, I guess Reb Chaim Weiss, wants to prove that you're mechuyev to learn from a Mishnah Berurah. That we know you're not allowed to bathe on Tisha B'Av, right? What about if your Rebbe's coming to the city? So there's a mitzvah to greet your Rebbe. So you go out to greet your Rebbe. You don't wait for the Rebbe, you hear the Rebbe's flying in from JFK. You don't say, okay, I'll sit down in my seat, I'll wait for him to get here. No, you have to go to the airport. Right? So what if, to get to him, you have to walk through the river, and while you're walking through the river, you're going to be bathing. So you're allowed to do that, says the Mishnah Berurah. You know why? Because even though it's only a mitzvah to greet your Rebbe on a Yom Tov, and not on Tisha B'Av, but there's still a mitzvah to greet your Rebbe on Tisha B'Av because you might hear Divrei Torah from him. Divrei Torah from him. But if you say it like the Shevet Yehuda, there's no mitzvah of Talmud Torah, and just if you're allowed, just right, if that there's no chiyuv of Talmud Torah, it's discretionary. So what if you hear Talmud Torah? There's no mitzvah. So Rav Asher Weiss's brother wants to say, you see from here, you're mechuyev to learn. Otherwise, what's the mitzvah? So he says, no, it's not a right. You're mechuyev to learn. But you do see, you're not mechuyev. But it's discretion. But if you do it, you get a mitzvah. So even the opinion Rabbi said that you're not mechuyev to learn, you're certainly getting a mitzvah by learning on Tisha B'Av. And even as Ben Tzion Abba Shaul says, even the opinion that it's discretionary, certainly a person should not waste their time. But Rabbi Ovadia Yosef learns that it's a chiyuv like any other day to learn Dvarim HaMutarim, but certainly we should spend our time Tisha B'Av wisely. We should be misabel properly. V'chol ha-misabel al Yerushalayim zoicha v'roya v'yeshuasa.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.